Hi, welcome back to the BizIT track. Once again, I'm Kavis. I'm the coordinator of BizIT track. To welcome to the people who just joined us, this is our second section. Now we will have a next section with driving engagement virtually by Mr. John. And Mr. John is the CEO of the Jungle People. Right, let's over to you, Mr. John.
Okay. Okay, there we are. So I'm hoping that everybody can see the slides right now. And if you can't, just drop us a note and we'll see what we can do about that. So driving engagement virtually. Wow, that's a big topic to try to cover in half an hour, but I'm going to try to do the best that I can, okay? So a little bit of introductions before we start. I'm from a company called The Jungle People. We're not from the jungle, and I'm sorry I didn't bring my loincloth and my Tarzan suit today. But what we do is we are experts of survival in the corporate jungle and the concrete jungle, hence the name The Jungle People. So we figured that if it's a jungle out there and everybody's talking about how tough survival is, then we are the people that you should come to. So we've been around for 20 years now. We've done learning sessions and we customize programs and solutions for our clients in three major areas, in teams, in building leaders, and in building organizations, culture development, vision building, and so on and so forth, all right? And that's basically what we've been doing for the last 20 years. We do our sessions all over the place, but mainly these days, we do our session virtually for obvious reasons to everybody, right? So that's me. My name is John, and I've been leading the team here for the last 20 years. When I first started this organization, the hair was black. Now it's not quite so black anymore. But we've been making engagement as the cornerstone of our programs and our solutions for the last 20 years in terms of crafting experiences that help enrich people, that people can learn from. And to be very honest with you, in the last 6 months, we've had a huge learning curve about how people learn and how people engage online. And again, for obvious reasons, why everybody had to go through some of these learning curves. So having learned the lessons that I've learned in the last 20 years and having to adapt the lessons that I've learned for the last 6 months, that's what we're hoping to share with you today. So we're going to look at things from two perspectives. One from engagement, understanding on a big picture level what engagement is all about. And the other thing that we're going to explore is how to engage in a virtual setting. So in meetings, in online trainings, or just a video conference such as now, right? The key takeaways that I want you to focus on for the next half an hour is to understand what engagement entails, and then to understand in a more intimate manner how you can drive engagement with your employees or with your clients, with your customers, whoever is on the other end of that platform that you're currently using, okay? So looking at the situation now, we've got to understand first and foremost, what is engagement? And if you look at engagement, it's one of the key buzzwords that are going around everywhere right now. Everybody talks about engagement surveys. We talk about the ability for leaders to engage their team members. We talk about how managers must learn to engage their subordinates and so on and so forth. So engagement is a huge word and a huge buzzword. And I suppose the definition that we like to have is the extent to which a person chooses to apply their focus, energy, and attention towards whatever effort. And the key word there is about choosing. And of course, focus, energy, attention. But the key thing here is that individuals who choose to focus their energy and attention towards the effort. Choice. Now, if you don't remember what the definition is, that's fine. That's really not important. Just think of when I say the word engagement in the traditional non-corporate side of things, right? Engagement is usually used when? And if you're thinking right now of somebody getting on his knees and making a proposal, will you marry me? And therefore they are engaged, right? So engagement in that sense can only happen if the other party says yes. So if you're on your knees and you're begging the person, please, will you get engaged with me? And the person says no, you are not engaged. Now, the reason why I'm emphasizing this is because I want you to understand that sometimes you can do whatever you want and you can do anything that you want. The choice of whether to be engaged or not still lies with the other party. And a lot of people don't realize this. So they beat themselves to death because they can't get engagement. They beat themselves to death because the other party is not paying attention and so on and so forth. Now, am I saying then not our fault? Engagement then is not necessarily my fault. It's the other party's fault. So if there's no engagement, it's him. No, that's not quite it either. Because if you got down on your knees and you say, "Oi, you want to marry me?" I'm pretty sure that the answer is probably going to be a negative, right? So, and hence, the job and the duty of the person trying to get engagement is to basically create a situation that is more likely for the other person to say, yes, I will choose you. I will choose to apply my focus, my energy, and my attention towards you. Can you get away without a proposal? Can you get away without snazzy big cars and huge, these days, I'm not sure if it's happening in your country, but back in Malaysia, there was a huge billboard one day by the side of the highway with a young guy proposing to his girlfriend. So are we saying that we have to go down that road for engagement? And the answer is not necessarily so. You could get away with, hey, you want to marry me? If the relationship that you already have with the other party is extremely, extremely strong already. Okay, so that's the concept of engagement, right? The choice in which the other party has to say, yes, I will engage with you, or no, I will engage with you, and the duty and the responsibility that we have as the party trying to get engagement. Really important that we understand both aspects, okay? So we're not going to be able to control whether the other party says yes or no, but what we can do is we can control what we do. So from a corporate perspective, we look at engagement in three major buckets. And to be honest with you, we've discovered that the philosophy of engagement hasn't changed very much, whether it's on a virtual situation or whether it's in a real life situation. It really doesn't make that much of a difference as far as the philosophies are concerned. There are three major buckets that we look at when we talk about driving engagement. So employees are engaged if they are productive. That's the first one, right? Are they delivering results? When in Malaysia, when the government enforced lockdown, and I think in some of your countries, you're probably still in lockdown in India and so on and so forth. I had many of my clients, many of my senior managers texting us and just basically worried, right? Will my people be working at home? They're going to be stuck at home. I'm not going to be there to monitor them. Will they still be productive? Are they still going to be doing work? And that was one of the key questions that everybody was struggling with in the first couple of weeks. And my response was pretty simple. Is the work getting done? And if the answer is yes, that's how you're going to be managing from now onwards, right? You're going to be working and managing via results. You're not going to be managing via activities. And that's a really important point when you're looking at engaging virtually. You're no longer managing activities, you're managing results. And it is critical for managers, whether IT or otherwise, to understand that it's not the kind of things, the amount of things that they're doing, it's whether or not they're engaging in the right kind of things and whether they're getting the results that you want. So that's the first one, right? Productivity and engagement. People are engaged if they are productive. The second P that I want to share with you is participative. Employees are engaged if they are accessible, if they are present, and if they are involved. And from a virtual perspective, this is probably the more difficult aspect to manage virtually. How do I get people to participate if I'm not there with them, if I'm not able to push them, if I'm not able to drive them, if I'm not able to motivate them, to encourage them? I don't even know where they are, right? Because they're at home. I once had a Chinese organization from China. Well, it's really interesting. One of their techniques to ensure participation during a work from home situation was they enforced turning their video on. So most of you right now probably don't have your video on. If you were working for this organization, you would be required to turn your video on from 9 to 5 o'clock, regardless of whether you liked it or not. And that was one method that organization chose to enforce participation. I'm not a huge fan of that. I'm not sure whether it worked for them, but I'm quite sure that it's not going to work for many organizations. And I don't think it worked out pretty well. But the intention was the same, right? The intention is to get people to participate and to ensure that you are participating and that you're there and you're accessible when it's necessary. But we've got to think of some other ways to get participation. And we'll explore this in detail later on, because that's what the session is going to be about after this, right? The third measure of engagement is about positivity. Are your people, are you feeling positive? Do you have elements of self-care and personal well-being that allows you then to say, I'm in a good place and I am ready to contribute in a good manner, in a positive manner? And one big mistake that a lot of managers make in driving productivity, because they want to go to the first bucket, which is productivity, they neglect or they downplay the need for positivity, for self-care, for well-being, and so on and so forth. So in the first couple of weeks of work from home globally, there were a lot of people who were actually in a burnout situation. They weren't doing really well, not because they weren't getting work done, but because they didn't know how to turn off. So work-life balance was skewed the other way around. They didn't know when to stop working because now they were working from home. And guess what? You are home all the time. And because they're working from home and you're home all the time, therefore work all the time. And working all the time isn't necessarily good, right? So there was a lot of people in very stressed out situations. There was a lot of people in a very negative mindset, especially the first couple of weeks, partly because the managers were driving the concept of work from home without having a clear distinction of where home began and where work stopped. Okay, so general rule as far as positivity is concerned is pretty simple. You check in on the individual's well-being before you check in on the individual's work. That's how you drive engagement, right? For people to know that as leaders and as bosses, we care for them as people before we care for the work that they do. And the logic is also pretty simple, that if people are in a good space mentally, emotionally, and physically, they are then more able to produce work that is productive, and they're more able to then mentally and emotionally participate in whatever it is that you're trying to get them to participate in. So I cannot emphasize enough the concepts and the importance of ensuring well-being, right? From a leadership perspective, just remember, people first before work. Make sure that people are doing well before work. Okay, now, because today we're talking about how to drive engagement virtually, and I want to give you some tips to take away about things that you can do and things that you can control while using a virtual platform. I'm not going to touch so much on productivity and positivity, but I want to put this tree out there so that you do understand that engagement requires all three buckets to be in healthy positions before you can actually say your employees are engaged. Okay. For today's purpose, I'm going to drill into participative. Okay. Now, these are some of the criteria for whether employees will be engaged. So we look at productivity. Are they clear of their deliverables? Are they meaningfully occupied at work? Are they able to deliver and complete tasks? So there are elements of competency that needs to be in place. Oops. My apologies. I seem to have. Okay. So what's going to happen is, okay, I'm back. So when you look at participation, okay, I'm going to give participation last because I'm going to drill into that a little bit more. When you look at positivity, are people proactively preparing for the future? Are they enthusiastic? Are they reachable? These are all signs as to whether the individual is still as positive as you would like them to be. Again, productive, positive, regardless of whether you're doing it virtually or not, you should be paying attention to these things. Today, I want to drill a little bit more into participative. Can your people be easily reached? Are they actively communicating and responding? Do they advocate your company's initiatives? Are they verbally advocating your company's initiatives as much as you would like them to be? And how do we get people to take part and engage if we are using an online platform? That's really something that we want to be able to explore today. Okay, so we're going to be looking at participative. So if you've ever had meetings online, if you've ever had conferences, taking part in training programs and so on and so forth, you know how difficult it is to get people to participate in an online situation. You know what? You know how difficult it is to get people to participate in a face-to-face situation. It's always been tough. And that part of the reason why it's always been tough is because there's a cultural element that is involved as far as participation is concerned. Now, I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but if you've heard of the Hofstede Cultural Index, the Hofstede Cultural Index is a study done, really interesting, that explores how different countries participate differently. And one of the elements that they discovered was called it was called power distance. So power distance is exactly what it means. It's the distance between people with two different levels of power. So the higher the power distance, the more difficult it was to reach across that distance and engage. And surprise, surprise, they discovered most of the Asian countries, Asia Pacific countries, were higher in power distance, which made it more difficult for people to reach across that gap and then truly engage with one another. Now, what does it look like in real life? You would see countries with lower power distance, and if they had meetings, they would probably be challenging each other a little bit more. So if boss says something, you would have the rest of the people in the team saying, "Not sure about that, boss. You know, I have a different opinion, boss," and so on and so forth. In a high power distance country like Malaysia, like India, for example, you would probably get silence. Does everybody agree? Yes, we agree. Even though I don't agree. Now, what's going to happen then is under the table right now in the age of technology, you would probably have people WhatsApping one another and saying, "I don't agree. I don't, you know, I don't think this is going to work," and so on and so forth. But face to face, it's going to be a different story. So it's always been difficult, right? For Asian countries to gain participation in that sense. Not impossible, just difficult. So if you look at these 4 quadrants right now, you're going to see some pretty familiar descriptions. 4 quadrants, right? Think of the meetings that you have online. Think of the last time you had a chat with a couple of people in a video conference. Are they in the gray area? I don't want to be here. They're not responsive. If you do ask questions, they're a little bit defensive, not even sure whether they're distracted or texting or because I can't see them, or do they sound bored, right? Versus the orange quadrant, participative, they're responsive, they're present, they're excited. There's a high level of excitement. Or the blue quadrant, which is quiet, I'm paying attention. I will ask questions to clarify and might follow up with you to say, what exactly did you mean about this? And then you've got the green quadrant where people are receptive, where they share input, they're willing to give their thoughts and their opinions. They're asking questions not just to clarify, but to gain new insights. And the last one is probably for me the biggest telltale. Are they value adding? So not just saying, yes, I agree, but yes, I agree, and here's what I think, and here's how it can be made better, and so on and so forth. So take a minute, actually take 5 seconds, and in the next 5 seconds, think about your meetings and see where do you think the audience lies in these 4 quadrants. And you know what? Most of the time, when we talk about meetings, online or offline, especially online on a virtual situation, and especially if there are different levels of authority involved, the reality is most people are in the gray area. I don't want to be here. I'm here because I don't have a choice. I'm here because boss says I have to be here. I'm here because what to do, I'm going to get in trouble if I am not here. And this is not a good basis for engagement. So when you look at engagement, there are basically 2 components, if you will, of driving engagement. So being after 20 years in the learning industry, the question that we asked was, why were some sessions that we did more engaging, some sessions that we did not quite so engaging? And we dissected those sessions that really worked, where everybody was really focused and really turned on, and we discovered that there were 2 sets of switches that we had turned on, whether consciously or unconsciously. And when we flicked those switches consciously, we could turn engagement into almost a guaranteed deal versus blaming it on the audience and saying they're not paying attention or they're not being focused. Okay. So these two sets of switches. You've got internal switches. Internal switches are processes that stimulate the heart and the mind. We call them internal switches because it switches on something inside the individual from the emotions perspective and the mental perspective. It stimulates thinking and it stimulates feeling. And this is what internal switches do. So if you learn how to switch on individuals internally, you'll find that they become very thoughtful, they become they become very emotionally linked to you as the presenter or to the topic that you are presenting, right? So internal switches are really important. And the key to internal switches, and by the way, I'm going to make a caveat here and say I'm not going to dwell too much on internal switching today because that's a whole topic by itself. And you can spend a whole day dissecting that. But really, in a nutshell, the internal switches are switched on by questions. The better your questions, the stronger you flick some of those switches on. Okay. Again, the main method that you switch on those internal switches are by the questions. The better your questions, the better those switches are going to be extremely dialed up. The other switch, obviously, if you've got internal switches, then you're also going to have external switches. And that's what we're going to drill into a little bit more today. External switches are switches that, well, anything other than internal. Anything that you can see, anything that you can visualize, anything that you can touch and so on and so forth will form part of the external switches. And if you go by that basis, then if you manage Oh, okay. So detention is, I don't want to be here because that's in detention. Why is a person in detention? Is because the switches were not on. Internal switches were not turned on. External switches are not well turned on. So we're not putting them into an environment that is stimulating, and we're not stimulating them internally. Why would we expect the individual to be there? So there are other three different types of engagement. We call this the theme park engagement. A theme park happens when you've got external switches extremely dialed up, internal switches not so much. So this person now is surrounded by messages, is surrounded by an ecosystem, if you will, is surrounded by things that makes it loud, that makes it, energetic, and so on and so forth. And therefore, this person now can't help but to walk around saying, wow, this is cool. I may not take part in the rides, but this is a cool place because, I'm having fun. I'm surrounded by energy. And that's a theme park kind of engagement. What you also have is you have the opposite end where the internal switches are extremely dialed up, but the external switches are extremely dialed down. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, because if you've ever been in a theme park, if you've ever been to Malaysian Sunway Lagoon, globally Disneyland, and so on and so forth, if you've ever been there, you will find that there is a limit to how long you can stay there. You can't go on theme park rides forever. After a while, you're gonna say, you know what, I'm done for the day. And this is where the Zen garden comes in. The Zen garden is what I call quiet engagement. Quiet engagement in the sense that this is where people go to be quiet and to reflect and to think and to reconnect. And that's not a bad place to be. The question is now, are you putting them there, or are they going there consciously or not? This is the Valhalla. This is the nirvana, I suppose, of engagement. The theme park is in place, but at the same time, this individual is also having reflective thoughts going on at the same time. And this is what we call mountaintop moments. Mountaintop moments drive commitment. When you are able to engage a person internally and externally, the chances are very high that the person will say, you know what, let's go for this. I'm totally committed to this. I'm on board 100% and I'm buying in. So the question is, how do we get to the mountaintop, right? So I give you a quick tip just now about internal switches and internal switches using questions. The better, I emphasize again, the better your questions, the higher your chances of switching on those internal switches. As opposed to most people thinking the better your answers. So it's not about the answers right now, it's about the questions. And this is where I think most managers need to have a shift in perspective, because as managers, we are very committed towards finding answers. I'm asking you to think of Google, I suppose. So why do I say Google? IT, right? Why do I say Google? Google is only as good as the questions that you ask. So if you learn to ask Google really good questions, you get really good answers. If you ask Google rubbish questions, you get rubbish answers. Same rules apply in the matrix of engagement. If you ask really good questions, you get really good responses and you get really good engagement. Okay. But putting that aside, today we're going to be talking about external. Now, the three major elements that talk about that you can switch as far as environment is concerned. Okay. When you look at environment, whether you like it or not, virtually or not, environment is critical. You've got to be able to manage your environment and the environment of your audience in order to ensure that there is minimal distraction around. And what's really interesting is when we are working from home, and when my team first started working from home, everybody, sort of didn't want to, it was just literally working from home anywhere they were in the home. And after the first 2 weeks, we enforced, I suggested that let's in your home, build a place where you are going to be working from, and build that place where you're going to be presenting and where you're going to be sharing. So every time we have a video conference, that's where you're going to sit, and you look at the environment around you, look at the background around you, and so on and so forth. And well, me being the boss, they had no choice, they had to follow that. So they set up that little corner of their home, did up their background very nicely. And it was really interesting because the minute they did that, and the minute they sat down there for the video conferencing to happen, they seemed to switch on a mentality that was different, because the environment that they were in told them that, hey, this is the psyche that you need to put on. So it's sort of like wearing gym clothes to go to the gym, right? Versus wearing your pajamas and telling yourself you've got to go to the gym. So you got to prepare the audience in that sense, and you've got to manage the settings as far as the platform is concerned. The second point I want to make here as far as external, and here I say energy. External here is external to you. It's internal to me, but external to you because you see my levels of energy. When you're working in a virtual platform and when you're trying to engage virtually, I recommend that you go normal energy, and then you raise it by another 50%. And yes, it's 50%, it's not 15. And a lot of people don't realize this. So they talk the way they would usually talk if it was face-to-face. So they would go like, hi guys, good afternoon, how are you doing? Oh, really nice to see you today. Now this is normal. But this is because it's normal. What you don't realize is the minute it goes through a virtual setting, it takes away a lot of energy. And by the time it reaches your audience, the energy is sort of down here when you thought it was sort of up here. So you go high, right? And you go like, hi, everybody, how are you doing? Good to see everybody today. Now, this will not feel normal, but will look normal. So the way I'm talking to you right now, I'm willing to bet that I don't look weird. Would I talk like this when I'm talking face-to-face with somebody? Probably not. So whatever energy levels that you've got right now, default, push it up another 50%, okay? So when in doubt, go loud. Virtual, same thing in a classroom, but more so in a virtual setting when you're not sure if the other person is paying attention. Like right now, I can't see any of you guys, right? So my default right now is I'm going to go loud and I'm going to say, hey, everybody, pay attention to me, because when you go loud, you're telling people to pay attention to you. Most people, when in doubt, they go soft. Most people, when in doubt, they start having, I'm not sure whether I should be paying, and they go down a little bit softer. No, go the other way. Now, the video feed matters. I'm not saying that you need to have your video on all the time, but you've got to understand when to use the video feed. Now, working from a virtual situation and when engaging in a virtual situation, whether in meetings or presentations or whatever the situation is, you can choose to have your video on or you can choose to have your video off. My advice is turn on your video when you really want them to engage with you. And because here's the deal, right? 90% of our messages go out via body language. 10% of the message goes out via the words that you use. When you turn off your video, you lose 90% of how those message reaches the other person. Now, this one, if you're unconscious and you don't know about this, most people don't know about this fact. So what happens is they try to turn off your video. Why do they turn off your video? It's because they unconsciously know that people are going to receive those messages by default. And therefore they say, I don't want them to see me scared, or I don't want to see me lying on my bed in my pajamas. I don't want them to see that, because all those sends out messages. However, what I'm saying is that if you want to engage, then you've got to use that to your advantage. Turn on your video and then send out those messages according with your body and not just the words that you use. It becomes a whole lot more powerful. Do you have to do this all the time? No, you don't have to do this all the time, because there is such a thing as video fatigue, right? And we all know that. But when it really matters, turn it on. When you really want people to engage with you, turn it on. If you want it to be even higher, and if you have the authority to do it, tell them to turn on their video as well. Don't do it all the time, but when you really need engagement, both parties, video on really makes a difference. Okay. The last thing I want to share with you is about engineering opportunities. And this is, I think, as IT professionals, you're probably the most comfortable or most aware of this. There are tools available that allow people to contribute. You can engineer opportunities where people can contribute. And the more you are aware and the more it's worked into your session, the more it's worked into your meeting, as part of the meeting, the higher your chances that people will become engaged. The problem is, most of the time, when we do a virtual meeting, we conduct the virtual meeting the same way we would conduct an offline meeting. And that's a big mistake. So one key mistake that we make is that we try to transfer offline situations into an online situation. And that's not the wisest thing to do. Huh? Let's just put it that way. So tools are brilliant. Tools allows individuals to take part. It allows them to get involved without putting them onto a situation where they are forced to get involved, or putting them on the spot where they have to answer a question that they may not have an answer to. That's the first bell. I heard that. So use tools, and there are tons of tools available. Go explore, just type in tools that you can use to engage people online. You've got tools like Kahoot, the Mentimeters, Buzzin Live, and so on and so forth. They're pretty useful. The second thing that you got to do is you got to create shifts in inertia. So shifts in inertia basically means getting people don't go monotonous, right? If you're lecturing and you're lecturing in the same way for 45 minutes, I guarantee within 20 minutes, you're going to lose their attention. But if you've got an ability and if you're consciously getting people to change in terms of their inertia. So if they're thinking and you stop their thinking to get them to do something, that's a change in inertia. Or if you've asked them to do something and you stop them doing something to ask them to think about something, that's also a shift in inertia. So creating this shift in inertia helps people stay focused on what you want to do. Okay. So wrapping up for today's session, remember the three main buckets of engagement: productivity, participation, positivity. And if you look at participation, splitting engagement into internal switches and external switches, just ask yourself, where do you think your audience is most of the time in this matrix? Which window do they sit in most of the time? And then ask yourself, what are you doing in terms of switching on the external switches and the internal switches that then gains them or gains you the engagement that you're looking for. Okay, so I'm hoping that that's given you an insight, at the very least, a touch of how engagement can be driven, and it can be driven in a much more structured manner than you think. Okay, if you want to know more, ta-da! Get in touch with us. Drop me an email, scan it over there if you want to. Check out our Facebook at The Jungle People. And more than happy to connect with you to have deeper conversations. Okay, so I'm gonna just very quickly see if, and I know many of you right now have asked questions. We're gonna take those questions, and if you could leave your emails together with those questions, we can then, connect with you in another when I've got more time, essentially, and we can have a chat about some of those questions. Okay. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I am done with the presentation today. I hope you have a great day ahead, great remaining conference going up ahead, and stay safe. Don't forget to wash your hands. Stay with. Back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. John. It's a wonderful sharing to our audience. Right. All right, kindly help us to fill in the feedback form before moving on to the next section, and you can find the link at the live event Q&A check or scan the QR code to fill in the form. See you in the next section with the topic of digital trialists.